Hi, we're Josh
and Ariel Wamsley,
owners of Green Valley Tree LLC, based in North Windham.
We're proud to sponsor Connecticut East this week and to serve the communities of Windham and New London counties with our tree removal and plant healthcare services.
Visit our website at greenvalleytreeworks.com for a full list of our services or give us a call on 860-234-4041. We look forward to hearing from you.
Sports and internet gambling, could it bring much needed money into the state and to poorer communities? And despite the fun of gambling, what can you do when it turns from an occasional thing into an addiction? Plus a look at other stories making the headlines from around the region. This is Connecticut East This Week. Hello, I'm Brian Scott Smith. The state of Connecticut has allowed gambling for many years, and we have two of the largest casinos in the country here in eastern Connecticut in the forms of Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods. Each year, these organizations turn over millions of dollars in profit, but also contribute financially to the state by way of taxes and their employment of local people and local companies for various services. This year, the legislature is looking at possibly expanding our ability to gamble by opening up the market and allowing sports and internet gambling. Both casinos have understandably shown an interest in being part of this new market, along with other companies outside the state that already provide these services elsewhere in the country. Cathy Osten is a state senator for the 19th District, which covers the areas where both casinos are based. She is a supporter of sports and internet gambling coming to the state, and I caught up with her recently to talk more on the subject. Joining me on the podcast is Senator Cathy Osten. Senator, as always, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Sports betting and internet betting, there are states around us that have had it for a while, and it's looking positive that maybe Connecticut may finally grant it.
Well, I'm hoping it's going to happen. I'm one of those people who waits until we actually see some language out of the governor's office that has been agreed on with the two tribal nations. And so I'm still a little bit hesitant to say, yes, it's going to happen. I'm a little bit more positive this year than I've been in past years.
Now, for about the last 3 years, possibly even more, but certainly for the last 3 years, you've been sort of like doing your best to shepherd a Connecticut mobile sports betting bill through the state legislature. Tell us a little bit about those efforts.
So we've actually been doing it for 3 years now. I was very hopeful to get it through last session, and we went into the pandemic. But what I started realizing was after the Supreme Court granted New Jersey the rights to sports betting, it became apparent that this was going to be a legalized activity. It has long been an activity that people participated in, but it has not long been a legalized activity, and that court case having the ability to do sports betting legally. So I've been looking to modernize gaming at two of the largest gaming institutions in the country, and internationally they're recognized as some of the best places to go to participate in gaming.
Of course, we're talking about Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun, both casinos here in eastern Connecticut. You've obviously had conversations with chairmen of both of them over, the years. What's their sort of take on what's happening here?
They think that, that the administration of the Lamont governorship has taken their time meeting with them, getting their feet wet, so to speak, in the gaming world, seeing what could be possible, and has not really felt the need to move this along. I, on the other hand, have felt the need to move this along. Both of the two tribal nations, the Mohegans and Mashantuckets, both their reservation and their gaming institutions are in my district. And so I talk to them regularly, and the workers of those two gaming institutions. They are, of course, two of our top 10 employers, or at least they were pre-pandemic, two of our top 10 employers in the state, and the two largest minority-based businesses in the state. And on top of that, they give more revenue than any other company in the whole state. They're number one and number two, respectively. So they're extremely important to the economy of Eastern Connecticut, to the economy of the state of Connecticut, and to the economy of the region.
It's fair to say that they haven't had the best relationship with Governor Lamont. Would that be true?
It appears that he has not had the ability or the want to have real discussions with them until this year. This was the first year he actually had a couple of people from his administration talking with the tribal nations.
Obviously, a little bit of a cynical question. I mean, last year when the pandemic really took hold, the legislative session was sort of cut short and certainly disrupted. So obviously has the flow of money to this state and many others. Do you feel that that could be a driving factor now?
It may be a driving factor. I think that the administration has felt a little bit of a push because the Eastern Connecticut delegation, the bill that I've been shepherding through, is bipartisan, bicameral piece of legislation supported by all of us in Eastern Connecticut, because we recognize the fact that many of the people who live here work there. We want to make sure that they can get back to work. We know how important that is, and we also know that they are the main supporters of the nonprofits in Eastern Connecticut. So there isn't a single component of business in Eastern Connecticut that they're not involved in. As a matter of fact, just in Norwich itself, there are 164 businesses that are subcontractors in one way or another with the two gaming institutions. And that doesn't count all the other towns that are around this region, but just in Norwich itself, 164 businesses that interface with the two gaming institutions. And some of them have shut down as a result of the slowing down of the businesses at the gaming institutions.
Apart from the obvious economic benefits, which could be huge for both of the casinos if sports and internet betting is legalized here in Connecticut, what else do you feel it could bring to the state?
It's well known in other states that have sports betting, online sports betting, and internet gaming. That increases the foot traffic in the two gaming institutions. So we look forward to having more tourism in the area, or more tourists in the area, coming here, seeing what we have, spending money at our hotels, visiting our venues such as Mystic Aquarium or Mystic Seaport, or any of the other areas, our great theaters, the Guard Theater, and many of the other places around Eastern Connecticut. We look forward to them going to our restaurants and supporting businesses there. So it would be a game changer, it would be a game changer. Even if it had happened pre-pandemic, it would have been a game changer. Especially now, it would be a game changer to revitalize the area. Right now, we more than doubled our unemployment in the region. We're over 17,500 people that are currently out of work. We had about 8,000 unemployed people in the region, and now so we're more than double that. Now we'll get these people back to work, which is extremely important. It's very hard for people to think about much else when they're trying to figure out how they're going to pay for their next meal or make sure their house is warm in the very cold weather that's outside right now. And, I can't say this enough. They support more nonprofits than any other business. They help out at Mystic Aquarium, at Mystic Seaport. They help out at Reliance Health and TVCCA. Many of the fundraisers that are had at the two tribal nations, they go there gratis, so they don't have to pay for anything, meaning the money they raise goes directly into the pockets of the nonprofits. It is really important for us to modernize gaming, as is being done all over the country. And for us to be this far behind right now is a little bit disturbing. And I wish, that we had already gotten this done in the state of Connecticut. The bill that I put forward is essentially the same bill that I put in every year. I tweak it a little bit here and there. And in this bill that I have, and co-sponsored by, again, the whole Eastern delegation, I dedicating $139 million to municipalities. And that $139 million is about 3 times what they get right now from the grants from the two tribal nations. That would be easy to do and not cost the state anything should we modernize our gaming institutions and provide jobs for more workers, get people back to work, again, helping out all our nonprofits. And those subcontractors would be starting to revitalize themselves and get more people back to work there too. So it's a clear economic driver in this part of the state of Connecticut, and it provides decent jobs with decent wages and decent benefits. It's something that I am, committed to completing this year.
One thing to say is, and those are all huge benefits, and anybody listening will clearly hear your passion and understand those benefits. But of course, there is the darker side to gambling. And, what concerns do you have, or what concerns have you heard about possibly, younger people sort of like getting on the gambling bandwagon, as it were? It's going to make it easier for them to spend money, and, gambling can become addictive.
Oh, absolutely. So we have a council on problem gambling in the state of Connecticut. One of the other companies that's looking to try to break into the modernizing gaming gives nothing to help out with problem gambling, and that's sports tech. The next one would be the lottery. And the lottery gives about $115,000 a year to problem gambling. Between the two tribal nations, they give about $415,000 to support programs and staff to deal with problem gambling. They consider it very important. And in this bill, there would be additional dollars going to problem gambling. So it is something that both tribal nations take very seriously. And I want to address your comment vis-a-vis younger people getting involved with gambling. The computer systems that have proven to be effective on both restricting younger people from getting involved in online gaming or online sports betting or iKeno or even iLottery, the computer systems that have been developed are very good at detecting anyone getting involved that is too young to be involved, and they are able to screen them out so that they would not get involved.
Well, Senator Cathy Osten of the 19th District, it's always a pleasure talking to you. We wish you success with the bill. And if it does go through, we'll be talking to you about it in a future podcast. But for the time being, thank you ever so much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Green Valley Tree LLC is proud to sponsor Connecticut East this week. Contact Green Valley Tree LLC for all your tree removal and plant health care needs and more. Find us at greenvalleytreeworks.com or call 860-234-4041.
We continue our coverage now about gambling in the state, and with full disclosure, the next interview is with one of our sponsors, the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, who are a non-profit organisation affiliated with the National Council on Problem Gambling. I spoke with Diana Good, Executive Director, and Paul Tarbox, Manager of Advocacy and Communications at the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, about the role of their organisation. Diana and Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Diana, is of course there's this big discussion about the possibility of sports betting, internet gambling coming to the state as a means for the state to generate revenue. You gave testimony fairly recently. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. The first thing we always want to make clear is that the Connecticut Council isn't for or against gambling. We just want to make sure that there are safeguards in place as gambling becomes legalized and easier and more accessible. So that really is our stance. We understand that there's a lot of pressure to generate additional income for the state, and legalizing gambling is one of those ways. And we just want to make sure that there are safeguards in place, there's funding in place. There are a lot of people who can gamble and it's fun. And those are the people that we are not worried about. We are worried about the people who gamble and it's not fun. We want to make sure that there's treatment in place so people can get help if gambling is no longer fun.
And Paul, as we said, you're the Manager of Advocacy and Communications for the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. It's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek question to you. When people find out who you work for, do they think you're a little bit of a killjoy stopping them from, gambling?
Well, in my defense, they kind of thought I was a killjoy beforehand, so it was nothing really surprising.
But what's the reality, though? Like Dana said, I mean, you're not an organization that takes a stance, one way or another. So as a manager of advocacy, explain to us the role that you hold, obviously the important role that you hold.
Well, having had a background where I worked at the legislature for a long time, I'm used to being at the state capitol and having forged those relationships. That's kind of given me the ability to help educate a lot of those lawmakers that are kind of new, and to an extent also kind of remind them that, while expanding gambling has some great potential for revenues for the state in certain capacities, there's also going to be some side effects that are going to happen to their constituents as well. It's obviously the responsibility of any policymaker who's representing their districts to worry not only about the benefits of increased revenue, but also, how are we going to make sure that these families and individuals are kept whole? And it's better to have these safety nets put in place prior to the expansion than trying to be reactive after the fact. So luckily for us, Diana and I have been having a lot of meetings with very senior legislative committee chairs and leaders that have been very receptive to our message. And we're hoping to have this type of dialogue continue throughout the entirety of the process.
Diane, let me put this question to you. Do we know whether or not this is actually going to go through? Because, sports gambling and internet gambling, it's sort of been mooted before. It certainly isn't new in many other states around us. What's the feeling that you get about whether the legislature is actually going to go for this?
I think they're closer now than they have been in the past, but again, we really don't know. I think there's a lot of talk going on behind the scenes that we are not privy to. So I really can't answer the question as to whether or not this is actually going to go through or not. But I feel like it's closer than it ever has been in the past.
So let me just ask you this additional question then. What concerns do you have as an organization, or what challenges do you feel that lie ahead if internet and sports gambling is actually legalized in the state of Connecticut?
So one of the statistics we always use is if you live within 40 miles of a casino, the odds double that if you're a gambler, you're going to become a problem gambler. Once you can gamble on your phone, everyone has a casino in their house. They're not even 40 miles away from a casino anymore. So that really is the issue for us. It's going to be so easy for people and so accessible that it could very easily turn into being a problem. And the last thing we want to do is tell people how to spend their disposable income. We are not the fun police. We are not here to dictate people's behaviors. We just want to make sure that as it becomes easier and more accessible, people know that there's a helpline that they can call, not just for people who have a problem with gambling, but their family members as well. That really is the message that we want to make sure that people understand is, if you're a disordered gambler, there is help available for you, and you are not the only one.
So, Paul, let me put this question to you. Are there particular sectors of society that are more susceptible, or you have more concerns with regards to, problem gambling?
I think that everybody ultimately is susceptible to problem gambling. But obviously, we're generally more concerned about those on the lower income levels, for the fact that those losses hit those families a lot harder, because now instead of spending potential retirement funds, they're spending money for food or rent. So, again, it's a problem all across the board, but I think when you're talking about people that don't have much to begin with, anything that's going to tempt them, like for example, scratch-offs in distressed cities, we see a huge kind of influx of people that are just being targeted by that and spending, compared to their income, just disproportionate amounts of money on scratch-offs or Powerball tickets in the hopes that, it'll change their economic situations.
Do you feel sometimes, Paul, that's like the gambling situation, and this is just a general question, it's presented in an overtly attractive way? And I'm going to just preface this by saying I was listening, and actually I watched some commercials recently for the lottery here in Connecticut, and it was for a new thing I think called their Diamond scratch cards, and it was all very alluring, and I was actually quite surprised at how it was actually being advertised, to people.
I do think that you do a much better job of telling people, hey, here's these products you can enjoy, and not such a great job of necessarily saying, hey, if you have issues, here's where you go. But that's also kind of where the challenge is going to come, us working in conjunction with off-track betting, because casinos, and also with the lottery, by saying, hey, any type of expansion is going to mean a bigger piece of problem gambling awareness and education, which is what we do. Specifically, as Diana mentioned, with the online aspect. At least beforehand, if you had to physically walk into a casino, there would be at least some associated with signage you could see. Here, if it's just on your phone, it's just a whole different game to try to develop safeguards to put in place. So we're all kind of on our toes about trying to be careful for those safeguards.
And Diana, let me put this to you as well. Everything that Paul's just said, what about the young people? Because, of course, they're very tech savvy. They use their phones. They use technology all the time for literally everything. How are those safeguards, do you feel, are enough safeguards there to look after our young?
That's a really good question. And it's interesting because we used to think of the problem gambler as being the little old lady sitting at the slot machine. Now, the biggest demographic that has a problem with gambling is 20-year-old males. And a lot of it is because of sports betting. And one of the things that we're really hoping will happen with the legalization of sports betting, especially using your phone, is that the Connecticut Council is part of the development process. So that as they're looking at developing that software, they're also building in safeguards in the development phase instead of trying to put those safeguards in place later, so that they can set limits on money. People can set their own limits on the amount of time they want to spend playing. It's our hope that our helpline number can scroll through as people are playing, those kinds of things, and that those safeguards get put in the beginning, not 6 months from now or a year from now when we find out that this really is a huge problem.
One of the things I want to ask you, Diana, is, the funding for the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. Where does that come from? And of course, it's the $64 million question. Do you feel that you're funded enough?
The majority of funding for prevention, which is the Connecticut Council, comes from the casinos. The majority of funding for treatment, which is the Department of Mental Health, comes from the lottery. We could always use more funding. Funding is always an issue for us. I said a couple of years ago, I thought that the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling was one of the best kept secrets in the state, which is not how you want to run your nonprofit. You want to make sure that your helpline number is out there for everyone to see. So we really feel like what we will use additional funding on, and what we could use additional funding for, is really advertising our services so that people know that they have a phone number to call. Again, not just the problem gambler, but their families as well.
And Diana, how does the legislator feel about that? Because, you're clearly there for a reason. Your organization exists for a reason and does a very good job. What's the legislator's take on all of this? Because clearly you must be having conversations with them.
My feeling is they're really receptive to this right now. I think when we started this conversation 2 years ago, it was a much different story. We had a lot of explaining to do. People didn't understand us. They didn't understand disordered gambling. They didn't understand what could potentially happen when gambling became so much easier. And I think now a lot of the legislators are really getting it. I think that because of our advocacy efforts, the last couple of years, Art Mongillo was working with us, and now Paul has incredible connections to the LOB. And I honestly feel like they are really listening to our message and respecting what we're saying. And I hope that does translate into funding dollars for additional prevention.
Paul, what about, conversations with the two casinos here? I mean, Diana's just said that part of the funding for your organization comes from them. What sort of conversations do you have with them?
Typically, they've been really good partners when it comes to understanding the need for us. Pretty much the entirety of the gambling community is also recognized that responsible gambling and, to a degree, the problem gambling aspects are associative to their industry. So the fact that we're able to help provide those services and they can help provide some of the funding is obviously kind of a great relationship all around.
One of the things that I think we can all agree on, the casinos, sports tech, the lottery, it's in no one's best interest to have problem gamblers. It's in no one's best interest to hear these heartbreaking stories of how gambling has ruined people and families. So I think we are all on the same page when it comes to that messaging.
And final question to you, Diana. I mean, as I say, there are other states around us that have had and do have internet and sports gambling. Have you had conversations with them or organizations similar to yours that exist in those states to see how they've dealt with it and how they prioritize and try to put in some of the safeguards?
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with New Jersey. It certainly became legalized there initially. One of the things that's really unique to our situation right now is that it has been a slow process. So a lot of states had legalized sports betting without a lot of these conversations about safeguards in place on your phone, additional funding and things like that. So we are one of the few states that's really able to have those conversations with the casinos and the lottery and OTB about putting safeguards in place initially, instead of trying to figure this all out later. So in that respect, I think that we're very lucky.
Well, it's been great talking to both of you. And obviously it is a conversation that we will continue to have as and when the legislator make a decision on sports and internet gambling. Just before I let you go, obviously the most important thing, give us the telephone number for your helpline and how people can get in touch if they feel that they need to speak to you.
Absolutely. Our helpline number is 888-789 7777. You can also go to our website, ccpg.org. We have text and chat. Our helpline is 24/7, so anytime you think you've got a problem gambling, you can call that helpline.
Diana Good and Paul Tarbox, both from the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Time now for a look at some of the other stories making the headlines in the region recently, sponsored by
the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling is a nonprofit organization which, through advocacy, prevention, and education, is here to support individuals and families who are impacted by problem gambling. Our helpline, 1-888-789-7777, is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also have live chat and tech support through our website, www.ccpg.org.
The Mohegan Sun Casino has become the second mass COVID vaccination site to open in eastern Connecticut. Staff from L&M Hospital, part of the Yale New Haven Health Group, will be vaccinating up to 300 people at the clinic based on vaccine supplies. Dr. Kevin Torres is from L&M Hospital.
We'll split time between here and Mitchell College. Mitchell College is located in New London, so just trying to serve both communities. So about 3 to 4 days at each site. Once we get more vaccine, then we'll be able to ramp up. Each site is set up to go 8 to 8, 7 days a week. So once we have enough vaccine, we'll continue to expand our hours.
Jeff Hamilton is the president and general manager of Mohegan Sun and says it's all part of them giving back to the local community.
Really, since the beginning of this, it first started out with PPE distribution. We moved on to hosting a on-site COVID testing center, which is still open today. And then this is really, for us, we believe is the last stage. Let's get our community vaccinated. Let's stop community spread, and then hopefully we can all get back to some level of normalcy.
Vaccinations are by appointment, and only those eligible under current state vaccination rules can attend the clinic. In the Connecticut Examiner this week, the next phases of eligibility for the COVID-19 vaccine will be based on age, but with school employees and childcare workers given special priority and efforts made to reach vulnerable communities, according to the Office of the Governor. Governor Lamont announced that individuals between the ages of 55 and 64 could begin to register for the vaccine on March 1st. People aged 45 to 54 will be able to register beginning on March 22nd, those aged 35 to 44 beginning April 12th, and all remaining individuals will be able to register starting on May 3rd. The new timeline is a departure from previous guidelines, which prioritize essential workers and people with pre-existing conditions. In the day this week, community calls for solutions in the wake of a New London teen's murder. A group of 20 people gathered recently at THE Church in downtown New London, trying to sort out the problem and find solutions after the shooting death of a local New London 17-year-old Rondé Ford. The theme of the event was consistency and accountability. In the Norwich Bulletin this week, new research confirms what many parents and educators already suspected. More students than ever are falling behind during the pandemic, a problem especially present among those learning entirely from home in some of the state's larger districts. The percentage of students in those schools in danger of failing has doubled since last year. This school year, 33% of students are not on track to progress to the next grade, compared to 15% last year. In the Middletown Press this week, 3 weeks into the Department of Corrections vaccinations of the incarcerated population, 837 inmates, less than 10% of the over 9,000 people in prisons and jails as of Feb 22nd, have received the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. And in the Chronicle this week, officials at the Hole in the Wall gang camp believe there are sufficient funds to rebuild following a devastating fire at the camp on February 12th. The announcement comes a few days after a $1 million donation by the Travelers and Travelers Championship was pledged. And in next week's Connecticut East this week, with the COVID pandemic still disrupting lives and businesses in the country, what's the future looking like for America's shopping malls? That's all from us for this edition. Do send us your questions and story ideas to the show via our website at connecticut-east.com or Facebook or Twitter at Connecticut East, where you can also listen to the show again on demand. And please like, follow and share on your social media platforms too. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thank you for listening.